Someone sent me a clip of CAEDREL who had a comment on his stream, on his Reddit, sorry, about what he'd been doing on his stream and about coaching. So this is going to be my first like React video. So big moment. Now you're a real content creator. But to be honest, I'm going to keep these kind of like React videos like fairly small. I don't really like it, particularly when coaches do it. I don't want to comment on how other people are running their team and all that kind of stuff because nothing's ever perfect. And I don't like just poking holes in it where they're doing stuff way better than me and I'm hopefully doing stuff better than them. But I don't want to point those things out or kind of blow them up or anything like that. But this is a bit different because it's just a thing about coaching and about like learning theory and stuff like that. So someone sent it to me and we'll watch it together. Haven't watched it all yet, but I just checked that it would actually be something that I'd be interested in. And so I paused it after about 10 seconds just to make sure that'd be something that I'd actually would like to watch. So
I don't think we'll have time to play more solo queue much. So what is this comment? Oh my god. This comment was posted under the Nord scrim video and got thousands of likes with more fans commenting that it should reach CAEDREL. Okay. To CAEDREL, it sounds like there are a few categories in the team at the moment. I hope sharing my experience as a teacher will help you tackle these effectively. From what I see from your reactions, it seems like you don't have a clear path to solving problems. So you're commenting on the most important issues that you see in every game and trust that your players will internalize your comments to do better in the future.
This, I think, by the way, is a really big thing that we all struggle with in esports, but the scene in general really struggles with. We have people like analyze the game and think that that's coaching. So if I go through and I say things are wrong, we call that coaching rather than analysis, which for me is wrong. Like the analyzing step is part of a coaching journey or part of a coaching like routine, but it's not the whole thing. I don't think CAEDREL does that, but I just mean in general. We have that as a problem quite a lot. So working out the issue is one thing, but then you've got to work out like how are we going to firstly explain it to people so they'll understand it. And then most importantly, how are we actually going to put something in place so that we don't make that same mistake again.
In my experience, this approach overloads the students and they get completely tired and their ability to absorb and retain information decreases to zero. You can see from the level of play, it deteriorates as the session goes on into later games.
That, I think, a lot of the deterioration personally for scrims, I would say, is about just a long day and they're really, really tiring. So I've done scrims where we've done like no VOD reviews. I've done scrims where we've done like even breaks in between or talk about something completely different and they still deteriorate. They still go faster and faster. I think one of the things that's a big difference between coaching in esports to coaching in general or teaching, especially teaching, is that we don't have full control of the practice environment. So even if your play remains exactly perfectly, if the opposition's play starts to decline, then it's so difficult to like remain disciplined when people are offering you free kills all the time or doing something they otherwise wouldn't do. So I don't think that Game 5 is a mess because we tell people a bunch of comments in between games, but it is still a good point. Like the overloading, that part I absolutely agree with.
And it also feels like the atmosphere becomes tense because there is dissatisfaction. Okay.
Also, I think that's good in terms of dissatisfaction. I think one of the things that's really difficult, and you'll notice that I'm really struggling with it as well over this year, especially when we're starting with a new team, new season and stuff like that, is we have a tendency to only point out mistakes. That's because when a mistake happens, it's very easy to see that something else should have happened. Whereas when a good play happens or when a good play could have happened and nothing happened, it's much harder to like point that out. So I do think that does make the atmosphere a bit more tense as well. The downside we have here, and this is why I'm really praying that the multiplayer practice tool stuff that we can test with that will be useful, is that when you're teaching kids in school, for example, you don't learn by competing against each other. It's not like you split the kids in half and have this half competes against that half to get the most points on this math test every single day. Like that's our way to learn. And so that would obviously make things more tense. This is how we have to do scrims. We have to play against people and you play against people that you know. So that does make it like more tense. It's really interesting because from what I can read on this comment already, I'm very sympathetic to all the things that they're saying, but I also do want to have a bit of a defense of esports coaches. I think coaching theory is probably underutilized in esports, but I do think that there's a lot of real good reasons for that. And some of the people who are very into the theory often don't appreciate maybe some of the challenges that mean that the stuff in studies or the stuff in theory or the stuff in teaching might not necessarily apply.
Actually, scientifically proven that the learning yield is very, very low in high stress environments. What works better is to give students one.
So it's hard to lower the stress, is what I was saying, because like when we're playing against Los Ratones, for example, like you're still playing against Baus and Nemesis and whoever. So if you lose, you still lose to them. It doesn't matter if you tell players, oh, it's about we're learning this or we're doing this goal or anything like that. So our scrims have a goal at the beginning of the scrim. We try not to overload as we go through, and they still can get tense. Like Solari games got a bit tense. It happens.
One clear goal to work towards and only to discuss that goal with them after the exercise. For the coaching, I imagine that would look like you for this. You start the day by telling the team what you're working on today. Comms, for example, make it clear this is the goal of scrims. Then they don't need to hit CS. They don't need to win the games. They don't need to outplay their opponents. This is really important. No pressure to.
So this is the part that I think is a bit challenging. Like, I think in theory it's great. And if you could set up an environment where that would be the case, I think it's great. But the downside you have is that no matter what you do with the goal, they still need to hit CS. They still need to outplay their opponents and stuff like that, because the game system is set up to reward that. Doesn't matter how try hard you are, how professional you are, dying, especially dying at someone you know, feels bad. Like literally the screen goes gray, there's a horrible sound. Like the whole game is designed to make you not want to die. So there's already all these like inbuilt systems that kind of counteract what we would maybe want to do from an optimal learning perspective.
Perform on any aspect of the game aside from assignment. Their base levels are good and they won't make them unplayable if they don't focus 100%. The assignment during the day will be to share as much useful information as possible and time together after every game. The discussions revolve around this method because it prevents unnecessary overloading of the brain. You'll predict you will learn more. Let's say there are 3 categories of problems.
I think having a goal, you'll definitely learn more over the long term. I think a lot of reasons why coaches in ERLs don't do this or don't put this much focus on this is the longer the term, the more useful it is to be structured as a coach. If it's a week, having a goal is kind of pointless. If it's 5 years, it's going to be insane if you have goals that you keep progressing. And mostly in ERLs, we're much closer to a week than to multiple years. So that's, I think, one of the reasons why the system filters for people who just like come in and tell you all the things you did wrong, like the analysis part, like we talked about earlier.
Problems. The current method divides lessons during a session equally among the problems. So let's say they get 1 point each after this first game, fatigue start setting. So every consequent game yields 0.2 LETS points for a total of 3 points on every categories. That's a total of 9 points for the session. Oh, I see what you're saying.
46 months, let's...
Wait, I don't see what he's saying. Let me read that again. Current method divides lessons during equally among problems. So let's say they get... Okay, right. So you're dividing what you're saying about each point, but actually you're not really covering that much on each point. Yeah, okay, I get it now. I think I get it. And yeah, I'm gonna make this this part of the stream a YouTube video, and I'll maybe make the rest of it one. I'm not sure.
Go man.
So I
I see what you're saying.
focus on this. So it's
Working towards a clear goal together also boosts team morale, so you'll find a more positive experience. For things like Baus's flash, I would tell him.
Yeah, I think this can be good, but it's not always a more positive experience, I would say. So like, this is, as someone who is a massive believer in goals, I'm not a big believer that reviews do a huge amount. It's not that they're not useful, but I think from the way that we behave, we tend to think that reviewing the game is like 50% of the learning that a team does is reviewing the game after scrims. And for me, I think pre-planned reviews, individual sessions, and actually playing the game all do much more for our learning. So for me, I don't think it's that big a deal. And that's why, I mean, especially now, which I'll come on to in a bit actually, but especially now you'll notice that my reviews with Nordo are so light. We cover like one play and we cover it in a very broad way. And I'm constantly just asking them rather than telling them. It's very light. And I think part of that is because I'm not super precious about them. I don't think that they're like the be all and end all. But the downside is that it doesn't actually always boost morale, I think, to be focused on the goal, because people get frustrated that they can't examine the mistakes that are actually costing them games. Because again, doesn't matter how professional you are, the game is set up to make it so you don't like losing, you don't like seeing that defeat screen, you don't like dying. And so if you're focused on I don't know, we super hard prioritize grubs no matter what. And in this game, you would have, let's say, won if you'd have gone for dragon, but instead you prioritize grubs because that's the goal, and you learn about grubs, but you lose the game because of it. That still feels bad. Or another thing is, let's say you're learning about setting up Baron, and the Baron setup wasn't actually the key swinging part of this game. But because it's your goal, you still go for it. So you still spend your review just looking at the Baron, and then someone's like annoyed because you didn't cover the actual important thing of that game. Now, part of this is obviously like players' expectation, and hopefully that can change gradually, and you can be very clear with your like what's going to happen. But it still can be frustrating, and so that can have a big downside on morale. So I don't believe that having goals always necessarily boosts morale. Sometimes actually doing it the more old school way of just saying what you notice, saying what you see, can be important. I think that the biggest thing for me with the goals actually is not about necessarily the overloading or necessarily the morale. The really big thing for me is that because there's so many variables in League of Legends, a lot of what we talk about in reviews isn't likely to come up again. And so making sure that we have the right goal so that we learn the right things about the right area is really, really useful, because this exact dragon fight is never going to happen again. You might get stuff that's very similar, but the exact situation is not going to happen again. So what was the most useful thing in this game to look at is not the same question as what's the most useful thing for us to look at. So I think that's important.
In person, after the session, putting people on the spot in front of their peers rarely results in valuable learning experiences. I disagree with...
Okay. I was literally about to say, I actually kind of disagree with this in a way, but let's hear what Mark says first.
I'm of the opinion, and I feel like I've been raised like this as a pro player, I feel like people should be called out in front of everyone. I know it's sometimes like embarrassing, but when someone does something stupid, I feel like, first of all, it's good content. But second of all, bro, you're not getting away with that. You can't just sneak that in and get away with it. You're being called out.
I think it really depends. I kind of agree with both of them, actually. I'm very like a politician. I just sit on the fence. So I think that we should be very careful with it, and you should know your players really well, and you should know what they can take. And there's certain players that I would never call out in front of everybody, no matter what happened. But there are players who, firstly, it's appropriate for them because I know them, and also when it's that we have to make a distinction, I think, between the stuff that's like silly, that they know is silly before they tried it, and the stuff that's a mistake. So I don't know what Flash they're talking about, but if it's a mistake that's like he knows it's a silly thing to do, they've already decided, okay, let's say he's weak side, right, and he flashes forward. I don't know what happened. If someone has the clip and can quickly post it, we could watch, but I don't think it changes anything. Let's say it's like he's everything's gone back. Okay. I think I'm back. Okay, so let's say he's doing something that's just like fully stupid. Not entirely sure what happened there, but hopefully it's all fixed. And he knows it's stupid before he starts. That, I think, is actually, okay, maybe it's not the most like generous thing to do, but making people feel bad about that, which is kind of what you're doing when you're calling people out, right? Like you would never phrase it in that way, but the whole point is they're like tying some like negative emotion to it. I think that can actually be, I think it can be, it's tough, but it can be useful. So I think be very careful if you ever do this, like calling people out. But I know certain players who that's actually a very useful thing to do, and it can be a really good learning experience. And I think if you're going to do it, also then check up with them afterwards, and also be very clear about like, it's the growth mindset thing. Like, you're not stupid. What you did was stupid. Obviously, when it's content, maybe it's different. Maybe you want to call them stupid, but yeah. But I don't think it can also be a release of tension, because again, this is not kids who are like learning in a school and then have one test where it's really important. You're being tested like nonstop all the time, every time you play a game. So everyone's very used to dying. Everyone's very used to losing the game and that kind of thing. So I do think that softens it as well. And I just think like sometimes we don't have the time in esports in a super high pressure environment to be that protective. And maybe it's best, I don't think teachers should ever do this, but it might be quite different, I think, for professional players. There's a guy, Simon Cox, who is an Olympic performance director, he has this great phrase, which is, we're at the pointy end of high performance. And it can be brutal, it can be tough, but you've got to come to terms with that. So I do think there's a little bit there. Let's see if this goes on, but I've gone through the message.
I hope this message reached Cadel. Yo, thank you for that. Mr. Teacher. That's good. That's good stuff.
Okay. I mean, the last thing that I would add as well, and this comes from... at the moment, you'll notice that my scrims as well, we have very loose goals. We do have goals. But for example, the very first day, we did a pre-scrim meeting about how does the League of Legends actually work? And the goal for today was just to answer that question. So we used reviews and said, right, okay, how does this situation work? So I think one of them was a play around grubs, and it was like, okay, so we have free time on the support and they have free time on the support, but why couldn't we fight these grubs? And then they say, okay, right, actually it's because you need to prioritize waves first, and we want to be, if we're the ones hitting the waves first, we're the ones who make it there first, all that kind of thing. So they were really, really broad. And one of the problems that you have is that the more precise your goal and the more you filter towards your goal, the worse it is if you're wrong. If you just comment on everything, then you will touch on the most important thing for your team as well. But to actually answer the question, what is the most important thing for your team to learn? That's so hard, especially early on. I don't know what the most important thing for Nord to learn is. When we get a few competitive games in, I'll probably see, because also what the most important thing for us to get more scrim wins is not going to be the most important thing to get more competitive wins, because the game pace is very different. The whole environment is different. The stress is much, much higher. So that's the other thing about having a specific goal. I do think having a specific goal is great. I think having individual goals is okay. I would already start to argue about the overloading thing again. If someone's got like two things to work on as a person, and we've got two things to work on as a team, like one early game, one late game or something, I think that's maybe not optimal. The thing that I would say I 100% agree with is just lay out the session intentions from the beginning. So if your intentions from the day is we're just going to play it loose, we're just going to chat about whatever we want to chat about after the game, and we're going to enjoy playing League of Legends together, then by all means you don't need a goal, because that kind of is your goal. But yeah, so someone said that to me. Hope that was interesting, and I think a great discussion to have. So we can keep going like back and forward on it and see what happens.